Coordinator here at Writing Coaches. Got it. Um, Most of you guys know me, but yeah, I'm Kat. I'm the Missoula Ravalli coordinator. Outside of my work with Writing Coaches of Montana, I work as a youth counselor at a group home for teen girls. I've been doing that for going on 3 years now. And I have had to do a lot of training regarding trauma-informed care. And especially working with traumatized kids for that job. So that's kind of my why I'm interested in this and why I feel that I have something to share about it. But yeah, thank you guys so much for being here. Um, and let's get started. So the first rule of doing any kind of trauma-informed care is you have to be cognizant of what you're feeling and how you're doing so that you are able to use your own coping mechanisms and respond to the people you're working with in an appropriate way. So we're not going to go around and like have everyone share, but just take a minute to think about how you're feeling and also how that feeling manifests in your body. I've got this really awesome emotion and feeling wheel that breaks it down into sort of different categories. And my kids always tell me, because I always tell them, and then I slip up and make the same mistake. Good is not a feeling. You're not feeling good. You're feeling calm or at peace or something like that. And so you want to try and be specific about that. Because that'll help you understand a little more. But then we're also going to do a grounding exercise just to start out. So we're going to close our eyes and take 10 deep breaths together. So let's go ahead and do that. All right, when you're ready to come back together, we'll take a minute, reflect on how you feel after that also. In comparison to how you just were feeling in your check-in, and again, pay attention to how it feels in your body. Because yeah, like I said, the first rule of doing any kind of trauma-informed care is to be aware of how you're doing in any given moment and taking steps to make sure that that's secure, right? So anyway, to get into working with traumatized kids, first we have to talk about what is trauma. Just in general, it is a deeply distressing or disturbing experience. There are 3 types of trauma, though. It can be broken down to these categories. The first being acute trauma. This is a single incident like a car crash. This is probably what we think of the most when we think about trauma. Something big and life-shattering and, something like that. But that's not necessarily always the case. There is also chronic trauma, which is repeated or prolonged exposure to traumatic stimuli such as abuse or neglect, and then complex trauma, which is kind of a combination of the two and also a little bit of extra. Um, but it's exposure to varied and multiple traumatic events, often of an invasive interpersonal nature. This can also be related to abuse or neglect, and complex trauma is usually categorized as such when it takes place in early childhood, resulting in the trauma disrupting the child's development. So complex trauma is specifically going to be something that alters the way our brain learns to process stimuli as we grow up. Before, our brains when we're kids, we're such sponges and we take things in and we learn so much so quickly about the world. And this complex trauma is something that's going to disrupt that process in our childhood. And this manifests in a lot of different ways. Some really common ones are anxiety, problems with memory and concentration, obsessive compulsive tendencies, dissociation. And to be specific about that, that is sort of feeling disconnected from your body or disconnected from reality. paranoia, hypervigilance, and sleep disturbances. And all of these are things that can impact a student's ability to engage in school, right? Um, if you're having memory problems or if you're dissociated a lot, you are going to have trouble focusing on school and taking in the information that you're learning, right? Or if you're having a lot of sleep disturbances, you're going to be too tired to fully engage. You know, there's just a lot of different things that are going to make school a lot harder for a kid with trauma. Um, and also, I should be clear, everyone has some degree of trauma. You don't get through life without it. And so we're not like singling out kids that are, you know, have experienced something like really egregiously bad. Every kid has some level of this, and every person has some level of this. So we want to have a lot of grace for ourselves as well. Um, so yeah. Um, with these symptoms and schoolwork then being impacted by them, school can become a really touchy subject, and it can become what is known as like a trigger sometimes. You know, and I know we use the word trigger a lot in modern context, and it has this connotation now, but really what a trigger means in a psychological way is like an event or an instance that is upsetting and then triggers your escalation cycle. And we are going to get to the escalation cycle in a minute, but I'm sorry, I'm I'm out of order, but if so, classwork can become a touchy subject. If a kid has trouble focusing or remembering things, they might start to see themselves as unintelligent, which could result in them feeling defensive when discussing schoolwork. And maybe they're going to use tactics to try and avoid or get around having to try with schoolwork because it makes them feel bad about themselves. On the opposite end of the spectrum, a kid who's experienced trauma might become a perfectionist as a self-protective strategy. And they might be hypersensitive to criticism. They might have a lot of anxiety about the way they perform in school, because they are using perfectionism as a coping mechanism to keep themselves safe. In, you know, that's the way their brain is like processing their survival, right? Um, But that said, even though it can be a really touchy subject, coaching can be so beneficial for students with trauma. That individualized attention and validation of feelings from an adult is so important and not always something that they get a lot of. The sincere and detailed praise that coaches give can help dispel internalized negative feelings about the self. We also model healthy and respectful relationship skills with the way that we speak to students and the way we conduct the conversation in general. And it can also motivate students to express themselves more often by showing them that it is not going to be met with ridicule by strangers. Um, Especially with anxiety and stuff, kids can get really in their head and think that everyone is out to get them, everyone is going to dislike them, there's something inherently like unlikable about them, and we are showing them that that's not true. You know, I always say that the most important thing we do with coaching is to make a student feel heard and like their opinion matters, and this is even more important for these kids. Um, on an anecdotal note, we a year or two ago coached a class that had one of my kids from the group home in it, and that assignment that she got coached in was the only assignment she turned in that whole semester. And it was because a coach sat with her and made her feel good about what she had to say. So this, even though, like I said, it can be a touchy subject, schoolwork can for kids with trauma, it's so important what we do. Um, Cool. So then we were talking about the trigger point and the escalation cycle and needing to understand that to appropriately respond to when a student we're working with is having a trauma response. And so everyone has an escalation cycle, right? Like everyone has events throughout their day that are upsetting. And that can lead to agitation. It can lead to you know, maybe your partner doesn't do the dishes and all of a sudden you're having a screaming match, right? Like you're escalating like that. Um, and the escalation cycle can be disrupted at any point through using coping mechanisms to try and de-escalate the situation. But the thing with children, especially who have experienced a significant amount of trauma in their life, is they are going to have a higher baseline than the average person. So rather than their like even keel every day, where they're at in their escalation phase, being at like that calm point that you can see in the graphic, they're going to be hanging out closer to the trigger or agitation point. And so it is going to take much smaller upsetting things to have them increase and go throughout that cycle, right? Um, so that means they might have a seemingly over the top reaction to something others might find um, trivial. Usually in a coaching session, if this happens, and this isn't to say also that coaching is like triggering, but like I said, because school can be such a touchy subject for some of these kids, just having to sit down and be one-on-one and have that accountability about your schoolwork, and that can be triggering in and of itself, even if there are a lot of benefits to it also. But usually in a coaching session, it's not going to look like a kid getting upset and yelling at you. I have never experienced that in my 2.5 years doing coaching. Usually what it's going to look like is shutting down and disengaging from the conversation entirely, going maybe into like a dissociative space like we were talking about. So we need to know what to look for, and then also we will talk about what to do to avoid or recover from that, right? Um, so yeah, know what to look for. That shutting down is probably the most common thing that you're going to see in the setting that we work with kids. You might also see strong negative self-talk, a lot of "I'm stupid, I'm lazy, I can't do it, like not even worth trying," or "I'm a bad writer." You're going to see stuff like that, and that can also be a self-protective strategy that kids with trauma use, because it's like rejecting themselves before they can be rejected by someone else. So that makes it feel safer. And so that can be something you can look for. And then of course, intense emotional reactions seemingly disproportionate to the problem. We don't see a lot of that just because we are strangers and they're not as comfortable with us and we don't spend that long with them, but it could happen. So after you recognize that a student you're working for is maybe having some of these reactions, you want to communicate and validate. Focus on the emotions they're feeling right now, not the event that caused the trauma or any of that. That's none of our business. Sometimes students write about traumatic events in their life, and then maybe you're going to have a deeper conversation about that. But you don't need to be needling for like, why are you feeling this way? When I ask about I don't know, your intro paragraph, you don't need to be doing that. Just be like, yeah, I understand that this is frustrating, validate that they are feeling that right now. Use your active listening skills, let them explain for themselves. Don't try and make assumptions about what they're feeling. And also don't assume that they're being dramatic or exaggerating, or go the, oh, everything is such a big deal when your age route, because it is a big deal, especially when you're that old. And you don't want to come off as dismissive, because that's just going to make them want to shut down more, right? And also, to be clear, don't validate negative self-talk, but validate that it's understandable that school might make them feel that way. School is a lot. School has so many unpredictable factors about it every day, and there are huge expectations of kids. So it's understandable that they might be frustrated or have any other kind of emotional reaction to it, right? Cool. So once you've identified that a student is not having a good time in your session, and you've allowed them to express that, you can give them some options. Coaching sessions can and should be flexible to meet the student's needs. And we trust you guys to act as decent humans interacting with another human, and do what you think is best in that moment, right? So if a student fully shuts down during the coaching session, you can offer them the option of taking a break and coming back in a moment. You can ask them if there's a different part of the assignment they would rather focus on, maybe shift gears a little bit. And you can also just allow them to be done if they really
What
want
can
to.
we do?
What was that? Hello? Oh, sorry. Um, you can also allow them to be done if you don't want either of those options. Another thing that I forgot to put in the um, presentation, we always say that it's good for students to read aloud, and generally, yes, it is. That's a good skill to have. It is a good way to kick off the revision process. But if a student is showing a lot of signs of anxiety, really doesn't want to read out loud, you don't need to make them read out loud. You can read to them. Um, it is more worthwhile for us to have a student have a good productive session where they feel comfortable than a session where they are so in their head about having to read aloud that they can't focus on anything else, right? So yeah, be flexible. Read what your student read your student's body language, listen to what they're saying to you, and adjust accordingly, right? And then also model healthy relational skills. Don't treat the student as fragile, or this is especially important if they're writing about their trauma and stuff, right? And so then you have that context. Don't treat them with kid gloves, basically. You want to still treat them as a person like any other person. And you want to remain present and non-judgmental. That's again why it's so important. That's why we did the centering exercise at the beginning. We want to, in order to remain present, you have to be aware of what you're experiencing in a given moment. Also, when doing trauma-informed care, there are going to be things that are triggering to you. And so then you have to use your coping mechanisms in that moment to return back to baseline so you can be a secure place for this other person. Um, so yeah, takeaways, coaching sessions can be flexible. You have a lot of options. You can offer options to your students and adjust in the moment. Remember the importance of praise and validation. Shut down negative self-talk, but validate frustration. Be aware of your own emotional state and work to self-regulate so you can be fully present with your students. I would say those are my biggest takeaways for how we can be good coaches for traumatized kids. But I don't know, what do y'all think? Do we have questions? Do we have conversation points we want to bring up? How are we feeling?
Yeah, I have a couple of questions, topic
Okay.
points. One, do you have a feeling for or an idea for the number of students we might be engaging with that would shut down? I've never had a shutdown.
Okay. Yeah, I would say I have seen it quite a bit. I wouldn't say it's the majority of students by any means, but I would say there's usually at least one a class that I can tell as I'm walking around and watching um the coaching session happen. I can tell that the kid is just not about it, does not want to be there, is like fully like and often this actually just happened in the class I was coaching this morning. A kid I could tell was like actively upset to be sitting with a coach. Like to the point where I was like kind of keeping an eye because I wanted to step in if my coach was, being treated in a bad way. Um, but then usually the coaches are able to bring that kid back out of that and stuff. And that is something that I think our coaches are pretty good at naturally. And that's what happened this morning. By the end of the session, the kid was laughing with his coach and having a good time. But I would say there's about one in every class, one or two, depending on the class size, that I can tell watching is just not about it. But yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
Did you have?
I have another question too to follow up on that. Um, all right, so one doesn't have to have a super crisis trauma to be a trauma to have oh trauma experiences and trauma
Yes.
behavior. All right, that could be triggered. I have had students, and I'm thinking of one in particular, a young gal who was resistant to any kind of criticism. And
Mm-hmm.
yet, once they read their piece to us, we are going to now take on some critical, constructive comments going on. I mean, why would you not engage that? Um,
Mm-hmm.
So the moment that starts, I can see the, if you want to call it shutdown, but the resistance.
Yeah.
And whether that's she needs to be perfect, whatever happened in her life, I mean, it's pretty obvious if you just have your eyes open. Um, and then of course, then you've got to tread gently and be careful in how you phrase things. And what I find very, very helpful in those situations is, um, let's say, incorrect grammar. All right, him and I went to the store. Okay, so what I do then is I go into an option, never force them into correcting to what I perceive as correct. But say,
Hmm.
okay, current colloquialism is expressed that way. Him and I went to the store. I
Hmm.
said, in my day and age, when I was going to school and when I was teaching years ago, this is how we would phrase that. He and I went to the store, and I explained why. The objective and the subjective, whatever, and a very, very brief. And then I say, it's your option because this is today's. What sounds better to you? And I repeat it out loud. Pick, choose what you want. But this, I want you to know this, the difference here. Now you have a choice. So in other words, there's been resistance there, but I've just had a mini lesson, and they have the freedom and the free will to make a choice at that point, which empowers them again.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I love that. I think also because being told what to do, saying like you have to do this, that can also be uncomfortable for people, especially if they've experienced, certain traumatic events. Um, so I think that that's awesome that you're giving options. And also, I think that it can be a good strategy to pull back from the content a little bit, even though we always want to remain focused for the most part on the content of the paper and stuff like that. To pull back from that for a moment and focus on something like grammar, because that does kind of take the heat off the vulnerability that students are inherently having with us when they share their papers. So, yeah, I think that's awesome. I think that can definitely give a little bit of space that then you could dive back into the content in a way that was more productive. So, yeah, thank you, Mary Louise. Yeah.
Yeah, Kat, wow, this is such helpful information. Thank you. I love framing it this way and getting reminded about who we could be interacting with. The thing that
Mhm.
struck me today thinking about this is, from a coaching perspective, we're never really going to know, right, whether a student has experienced trauma unless they come out outright and tell us that in the content of their paper. Because a lot
Yeah.
of the behaviors that you're describing, like you said, I've seen in quite a few students over the years, right? I mean, it's pretty normal human behavior based on lack of sleep, stress that day, whatever it is. And it's
Yeah.
all a continuum. So it's just nice to be reminded these are the gentle hands that we should be using with every student, right? Because we don't know what students have experienced. And we only ever want to be value added helpful. We never ever want to come in and be hurtful, again, no matter the sensitivity of the student's past life experiences or not. Because the irony is it's not just because we want to be touchy-feely kind people. Of course, we want to be kind. It's also
Mhm.
because educational best practices and research-based best practices demonstrate how these types of approaches, less judgment, more attentiveness, more options, like you were talking about, Mary Louise, versus judgments, more conversation, empowers students and ultimately results in better academic outcomes as well for every student. So again, it's not like we can only apply these for students who have experienced trauma to increase the quality of the experience for them. These approaches and just making the assumption of, I'm going to take these approaches whenever I see a student starting to a triggering maybe experience is going to result in better academic and emotional outcomes because emotional outcomes and academic outcomes are never divorced. They're just not. We're humans, even when we're students, even when we're teachers. Um, so I just love that understanding because I can think of, I've been thinking back on a couple coaching sessions as you've been talking. And for instance, one student was getting very escalated one day I think my best guess is I was giving too much feedback, like, oh, wow, I'm overwhelmed as a student. I don't know what to do in this moment. I have so much that I have to change before this is due, all these ideas that students might have. And it was such interesting timing because we were in the middle of the session. He was really upset to the point where, I started saying, um, oh my gosh, I understand. I get really overwhelmed in school sometimes too. And writing is really tough because it's never perfect. And, so I was
Mhm.
trying to start sort of identifying with him in that way and sort of humanly. So funny though, in the middle of this, a fire alarm goes off and everyone has to leave the building. And we're out for, 10 to 15 minutes of a potential coaching session. And that in and of itself is stressful. But it was so interesting when I came back, the teacher said, I think so and so would like trying to work with you again if you have a few minutes. And I said, I'd love to. And he goes, yeah, I got a minute and now I'm okay. And it was just so sweet. I mean, he was this young person who could tell I just needed a little break. And I think he even said I got some fresh air or something totally charming. And he
Mhm.
was ready to engage in the conversation of productivity at that point. But for whatever reason, whether this kid experienced trauma or not, I'll never know from a coaching perspective. But what I do know is I have options about how to respond in the meantime. And sometimes the unexpected or maybe unwelcome things like a fire alarm in the middle of a coaching session can be exactly what it takes for something to be turned around. So we don't have to worry about being the directors of the sessions. I think sometimes we worry about that as people, especially if we've been previous educators. I think we can be more facilitators of sort of what comes up as it does organically. So I just want to thank you, Kat. This is really, really helpful information. And then we did have someone comment in the chat, Kat, if you want to respond to that as
Oh,
well.
yeah, let's see. Yeah, that's absolutely fair. And I mean every coach has different styles and we do want like our focus always uh to be on content and stuff. I do for my part, I will say if a student is consistently making the same grammar mistake, I will briefly just explain it to them because I feel like that's something they can take forward into other assignments and stuff as well. But you're absolutely right. The teachers do have that, and everyone has their own style for sure. Yeah. Any other questions or comments? Anyone wants to? Um, oh, I saw a couple new people joined. Hi, Jana. I will see you in an hour and a half back at Hamilton. Um, cool.
I
Yeah,
hate
any
to call
last
anyone
comment?
out, but I'd love to hear. I mean, I know I see all the names on here and you're all experienced coaches. I mean, can you think of any moments where you think these types of insights might be applicable and sort of like on the ground experiences with students? Because I'd love to hear about your insights. And sorry, just one more thing I thought of. The other thing with trauma is if a kid does start sort of, I don't want to be insensitive, but trauma dumping or something like that during a coaching session and just really opening up, just a reminder as coaches, we're not counselors. Even if we have a counseling degree in this context, we are volunteers. And so we can't be pretending to take on a role that we're not. So always just if that happens, inform your coordinator about it. They'll talk to the teacher and they'll make sure the student's getting the support that they need because sometimes students are opening up to us and we welcome that, but in a way that we make sure that they're getting the resources that they need moving forward. Um, but yeah, I just love to hear, does anyone have an anecdote or discussion or a concern or
Yeah,
we
I don't know if my sound's okay, but I'm Caroline and up in Whitefish with Jeannie. So good to see you all. I can't find my camera button, but anyway, I was at Glacier High School last year and they had essays that had to do with advancements in technology and they were argumentative essays. And I had a lady who I sat down with, and it would probably be described as probably one of my first non-starter sessions with a student where you could tell like emotionally there was definitely a wall up and some anger and just sensing that overall vibe of, they weren't coming smiling and kind of ready to go to work. And as we peeled back the layers, she had picked social media for her topic and had started to explain how she had developed severe anxiety as a result of excessive use of social media and additionally an eating disorder. And so I think sometimes too, as coaches, these students, the amount that they share with you and just looking for encouragement and just a stable voice that it's okay and we accept you, and encouraging them if they're open to it that they do have a story to share, and that they can help somebody else learn from their own experience and to feel a sense of empowerment with that. And again, not pushing that mindset on that, but it seemed that that was one that she was willing to receive. And so I think there was just so much emotion behind what she was feeling that to be able to give structure to her thoughts and her feelings um, helped make her feel that she could use her voice to influence others, to maybe have healthier attitudes and approaches. And so, like when you had talked about a trigger cat, I think even the prompt, for this exercise was a trigger for her. And just to your point, acknowledging, validating, listening, and helping them find power in their voice. But it was a transformative moment for me and hopefully for them too. But yeah, so I just wanted to share that. So it's it's there and it will reveal itself definitely in time, I think, through coaching. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah, thank you, Caroline,
Yeah.
for handling that session so gracefully. That really beautiful. And yeah, I have two things in response I want to say. A being when a student is opening up to you like that, and I think that you handled this so perfectly. So often I see this when we get new kids at the group home quite a bit. Um, Kids will say things in a way that is almost casual and stuff in order to gauge your reaction to it, to be like, is this something I should be concerned about? Was this something that was wrong? And so I think you validating, like, yeah, it's rough that social media did that to you. Like, that is not okay. And, you can use your voice to, make an impact elsewhere. I think that's so important because that's validating to this kid. Like, um, there is something wrong about what social media did to my brain. Like, there are false beliefs in there and stuff. And I think that can be really healing for a kid, for anyone. And then secondly, I also, with the point being that it was based around social media, that goes back to what I said at the beginning, that no one gets through life without any form of trauma. And so we don't even need to be thinking, when we're thinking about like traumatized kids, as a kid who had something really big and awful happen. It can be something like social media that is having a really big impact on the way a kid's able to cope with other stressors in their life. And so, yeah, I think you handled that so beautifully, Caroline. Thank you for that. Kid was, yeah. Thanks.
I just want to echo that. And I think Caroline hit something else that's so important is the prompt itself can be triggering, right? Which
Mhm.
means that you're walking into a situation where a kid needs extra support anyway, especially in talking to a stranger one-on-one about the content of that paper. And I think it's very easy, I'll speak for myself as an adult, to come in and sort of have so much distance from the prompt that I'm unaffected and maybe don't understand why a student might get triggered over something like, I don't know, anywhere from topic sentences to semicolons to whatever, right? You know what I mean? Oh, it's just writing. It's okay. Well, it's not just writing to them, right? Like if someone were to come up to me and say, hey, write a 5-page essay on your parenting philosophy and how you deal with toddlers who have tantrums, I'd be like, blah, 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 because I don't know, because I'm dealing with a 2.5-year-old for the first time ever, right? Like I'm figuring it out right now in this moment. So to be able to articulate everything that I might know about that topic while I'm actually in the middle of trying to learn about it, of who I am and what my identity is related to that prompt, is a lot more difficult than for me writing about Huckleberry Finn, right? Or something else that I could distance myself from emotionally. So really good reminder that it's not just about writing, it's about the fact that we're inherently working with young people who are figuring out who they are. And that in and of itself is a sensitive place to be. So yeah, these are great. Any other coaches? This is wonderful.
Yeah, I have another story, I guess. It was
Yeah.
several years back, and it, the students, it was in junior high, and the students had an assignment to do a book report, basically praising or evaluating, criticizing, a critique of a book. And I was assigned to a gal who had done no work. Apparently, she had read the book. She had done no work. There was no verbal communication from this child at all. Sat next to me. We sat there. And then I started inquiring. No response, not even to look at me. So, I mean, powerful resistance immediately. And I sat there and I could almost feel the tension, the anxiety, but anger. I mean, it was seething there. And so I said, okay, so your assignment is, and I read it because it was right in front of me. Um, and I said, okay, so you have a choice here. Would you like to, since you've done nothing yet, and I'm going to sit here while you move forward into this process. Do you want to praise this material that you read, or do you want to bash it? And she looked at me and she said, I want to bash it. Well, all right, so she commented, and I said, great. Now, can you give me some reasons why you want to bash it? Obviously, you're not in a happy place about this right now. Can you give me one reason? And she did. And I said, can you write that down? And give me two reasons. Okay, write that down. So I said, you have a great start to an outline here. Can you sit here and move forward a little bit? And then in about 10 minutes, read it back to me. And she did that. And I by the end of the session, I said, you are on the road to a great book, book review here. Great job. And you could just see her body was beaming. But it's funny how I think to sit there when you're confronted with something like that in the moment, to sit there and very quickly um, evaluate and just open the doors to, okay, I almost had no feelings. It was just total inquiry. I was so curious to know why and where she was at. And I think that was helpful to be so neutral and curious.
I absolutely agree with that, Mary Louise. And I think that touches on something, again, with why it's so important to be aware of where you're at emotionally and be able to regulate yourself. Because I think it can be easy if you're sitting with someone who, like you said, is like seething with anger, like you can feel it. It can be really easy to take that as like a personal affront, right? And it's not. We are strangers. Like the kid is not mad at you ever, right? Like they're mad at the situation. Um, and so I think that that is such a good reminder that approaching them with that curiosity then is only going to improve the experience. That sort of like that sort of detached curiosity, right? Where you're not having an emotional response to what's happening in front of you. You're just curious about it. I think that's awesome. Thank you, Mary Louise. Yeah. Any other coaches have anything they would like to share? Okay. Well, if we want to end it here, we can if there's no one else wants to say anything. Am I paused? Can you guys see me?
Nope, you're good. You're good, Kat. No, I just
Oh,
want to
okay.
thank you,
Sorry.
Kat. No, it's okay. No, I just want to thank you for the content today. And, like I said, we recorded this. I would encourage you all, I don't know about you, but if we're in a position of being an educator at any times in our life, and as coaches, we are stepping into that role for a small moment, right? just remind yourself to come back to these topics every once in a while, because I feel totally rejuvenated in being reminded of these things, especially these deep, deep human elements to that all the variables that are happening under the surface while we try to engage in an educative moment, right? There's so much else. It's like the iceberg, right? We're only seeing the tip of it
Mhm.
in a coaching session. And so just remember, please, that on our YouTube channel, we have a lot of these types of talks on lots of different types of topics that you can just enrich the way that you think about coaching and, frankly, the way human communications happen in general. I mean, you can apply these things in all kinds of contexts, let alone coaching. It's just really wonderful that Kat has these experiences and has a lot of deep, deep practice in working with kids who need extra support because of the things that they've gone through in their life. I'm just very, very thankful that you're willing to come bring these topics into our coaching discussions. So thank you today, Kat. And thank you to everyone who made time during your lunch break or otherwise in your day to help us extend these conversations. Because as we all know, if a person doesn't feel supported, they're not going to learn a thing. And so we need to be aware of these topics as we're going about our coaching. So thank you to everyone who came today, and thank you for participating. And we'll get this recorded up on our YouTube channel, and we'll send you a link if you have any more topics that you're interested in bringing to discussion groups like this, please let us know. We're going to keep these up throughout the year as always. And just thanks to all of you for caring, because that's a huge variable in student success. So thank you. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much. I so appreciate you coming.
Thanks,
I hope you
everyone.
have a great rest of your day. And Jana, I'll see you back in Hamilton High School in an hour.
Awesome. Thank you.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for all you do. Take care. Bye-bye.